we decided that we were going to keep his name in lights forever. Right, Dr. Jackson, Dr. Jackson. And so we named this after Charles. Last year, the day before he passed, we had our first forum for 2023. And I got a note about an hour before that forum from Pam, his wife. And I get emotional because in her grief, as this guy was on his dying bed, she thought enough of what we did here to send us an email and thank us. So I always get choked up on this, but Charles Ogletree was I guess I'll quote Cardinal O'Malley, who was eulogizing a terrific guy in Boston yesterday by the name of Jack Connors, and he said that Jack was not a celebrity, and Jack was a hero. Well, in Tree's case, he was both, but more importantly, he was a hero. So, okay. So just do what you can to help all of us keep his name in light. Reimagining Black female beauty through art. The lens and perspective of art is a timely topic. Most recently, I had the pleasure of visiting two very powerful exhibits. The first in London at the Royal Academy of Arts in Tangle Pass, 1768 to now, and the second at the Met in New York City, Harlem Renaissance and Transatlantic Modernism. In London, I saw two lithocuts by the brilliant artist Margaret Burroughs. I saw the brilliant sculpture Tavares, I know I'm not pronouncing this right, Strachan, entitled The First Supper, that included Harriet Tubman, Shirley Chisholm, and Marsha Johnson, an African-American gay liberation activist that was a key figure in the Stonewall Uprising in 1969. At the Met, I saw the work of Laura Wheeler Whaling on the cover of Crisis magazine in 1923-1924 editions, as well as a portrait side by side with her and her mother, and so much more. But the charge of reimagining encourages thinking, analyzing, imagining the extension of art into all phases of life in addition to the physical qualities of beauty. Now, this is about as far as I can go with art. But after meeting two people at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum last year in Boston, I asked them to think about joining us here at Union Chapel. The soon-to-be wasn't at that time Commissioner of Culture, Arts, and Special Events of Chicago, Clinée Hedspeth, and the gifted artist Fabiola Jean-Louise were there in Boston. And so I met them at this exhibit, and we started talking about this. And of course, given Clinée's extensive experience in the art, museum, and auction world, she immediately reached out to Dr., am I pronouncing this right? O.J. Aldrich, thank you, at the Getty in LA, and they too agreed to join us, and they immediately recommended Dr. LeRonn Brooks. So let me tell you something about them before they take the stage. Technology doesn't always work. Okay, we're doing all right. Clinée Hedspeth, prior to her appointment as commissioner in Chicago, was the modern and contemporary art specialist with Phillips Auction House based in New York City and London. In that position, some of her accomplishments include making the global record auction for Richard Mayhew, consigning the most amount of Ernie Banks' artwork to the international market, and appraising over $800 million in 2 years. That's pretty good. In any industry, that kind of works, right? 800 million, Dwayne, does that sound okay? Okay. Of art created by Black American artists from 1920s to 1950s. Her clients included Richard Roundtree, Diane Dinkins Carr, and the Kelmer Family Foundation, Austin Radley Foundation. She is the board president of the Edgar Miller Legacy and the Hyde Park Historical. She is, I love this, she tells me third generation mother's part of the Black Panthers is all in Oakland. By the way, I didn't know that Seattle was the second branch of the black. Anybody else know that? I didn't know that. Yeah, I mean, Seattle. All right. Now, Fabiola, you spent time in Boston. You have been a resident there at our Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Your brilliant work has been acquired by Spelman College, Beinecke University at Yale, Jackson. Granddaughter is a bulldog. Most recently, she was commissioned to produce artwork at the Met on Afrofuturistic period Room. Dr. LeRonn Brooks is an art historian and curator of the African American Art History Initiative at the Getty Research Institute. I think you're the first. Is that right? Okay, well, congratulations. He is responsible for building and developing collections to promote advanced research in the study of African American art history. Brooks earned his Doctor of Philosophy, Art History from the City University of New York and his Bachelor of Fine Arts from Hunter College. Please give a warm hand to our panelists while you come on up. Thank you so much. Please. We'll put the thorn between the roses. How is that? Okay. No, you're on the other. Are you in the middle? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mic working? Just double check.
It is. I think so. Yeah? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you for that.
Mic check.
Yeah. Well, Fabiola, thank you for everyone who's attending. This is wonderful. Let's just open up. You are amazing. You are amazing. History makers. Let's start.
Well, I want to start first by thanking Commissioner Clinée Hedspeth.
Clinée, but go ahead. Yeah.
I want to give the props to that because I've seen you go through a journey that is just amazing and magical, and as your friend and professional partner in some ways, Clinée is responsible really for ushering me into my professional career. She was the first to see something special in me, honestly, before I had even realized what I was doing, and provided me with my very first professional exhibition at the Dusable Museum. And so it's just been a ball that's been rolling and rolling and rolling since then. And so I'm here, and I've done almost like a full circle to talk to you because of the very first time that you believed in my work. So thank you. And can we please give her a round of applause?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So, Fabiola, your work, Huffington Post, the Met, Yale, Spelman, most notable for your work with rewriting history, but now you have this new chapter. Let's just talk about your center on using art history and recreating images, very painful but beautiful pieces. And I think that that's why it's so important that you're here to talk about the art historical canon, right?
Sure.
You show Black female subjects in our presence in 18th century fine art, Royal Academy, right? We're talking about the canon, global canon. What does that look like to recreate these pieces in paper, by the way, that talk about Black women and where they are and where we challenge and just are present? So just talk about your process and your thoughts. And I think it's also important for us to recognize that some creatives come just from a creative, but you also have this working knowledge about the people that have worked before you.
Yes. It's a very layered answer and question because I am using my work to create bridges and open portals into what I call the mosaic of Blackness. And we can't talk about Black freedom within one space, which is American or African American history, without talking or looking at the actual mosaic of blackness, which includes the Caribbean. We can't talk about black freedom without looking at Haiti, which is where I'm from. And so at the center and the core of my work, it's always with Haiti in mind, with conversation and presence for and with my ancestors, and how can I build that bridge to include all the other parts that I see are important to that. And so, all to say, research and understanding of history, a strong connection to spirituality and center with my culture and people, understanding that's also identity, and then also getting to a place of where none of that even matters is a part of the work. So it's a give and take, or it's some kind of mechanism of holding on to and then letting go, holding on to and letting go, which is why I work with paper. It's life and it's death, which I think very much represents time, history, humanity, change.
Thank you. Early on, you wrote that you work in paper because with the stroke of a pen, people were enslaved or free, right? And so you talk about when you recreate these images with black women and very distinct African phenotype, kind of, right? That you are very intentional when you create these period pieces. Dr. Brooks, if you could talk about how black women were used as props, background, and center to reestablish and enforce the way social norms, religion, economics are communicated, especially in the New World. So if you could touch on that. And I'd like to say, by the way, he is the first black curator at the Getty. That is a big deal. That's a big deal. And so if you could give us some context behind that.
I'm going to take a roundabout way.
That's right.
All right.
Okay.
So, what's really so important is the discussion about the diaspora, the African diaspora. And, I tend to think about it as, the spore, right? Diaspora, the many spores, right? The weed you blow and you see all the seeds in the wind. That was our ancestors, right? Seeding the Western Hemisphere. I like to think about it. So if there was a child, let's say a brother and sister who were taken from, Cote d'Ivoire or, Benin or Ghana, and that same ship would have went down to the Caribbean, right? Dropped off something to get the weight back, to put a person back on, right? The brother's gone into Hispaniola, right? And then the sister could have been dropped off in Louisiana, right? My parents are from Alabama. I could have family in Haiti. I could have family in Dominican Republic, which now I know. I could have, but we don't know. And so what does it mean that in your work you're thinking about the diaspora? You're thinking about not just African American realities, but our cultural traditions that link us to histories and families and bloodlines that we don't know because that's been erased from the record. So we all are a part of this thing. And so to think about black women being the engine of Western capitalism, being the people who were, during enslavement, producing our ancestors and the kind of labor that actually seeded the French Revolution, that actually seeded all of the sort of imperial presence in the Western Hemisphere. What does it mean that in terms of painting, in terms of Western art, black women are seen as, or have been, just beginning from the very root of the image of black women in Western art. Servants, almost seen as specimens, broken down as specimens. Like the Venus Hottentot, right? Black woman from South Africa who was taken. And so the vision of the Western art for black for black women is complicated, but it's also exploitative in many different ways. And so to think about how does one, especially as a black woman, reclaim that as a form of power? How does one enter a tradition? Because, you know, everyone in here has a job life, a work life, and you enter a tradition of the reframe the ways in which black women have been positioned in the Western eye to say that I'm going to take some of this power back. And within that, what it means in terms of what constructs that power is vulnerability. It is selfhood. It is all the forms of power that, in terms of patriarchy, men don't necessarily see it as power, but it is power. Intimacy, these things, self-regard, how one carries oneself, sees oneself, how one links oneself to one's history. But for black women to reconstruct that through your research and to do it in the way that you do it, I think is just brilliant, right? That's a lot to take on.
It is.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Fabiola, in one of your pieces, I do have to say a piece that I purchased. She has Whipping Pete, which, if you can walk us through that, and walk us through the icon of black trauma, but then black beauty, because a lot of times, even in Chicago, people will come to your shows, they come to your spaces, they come to the Met, they see your work, and it takes a moment for them to realize, oh my God, it's beautiful, but there's trauma. There's lashes on dresses made out of paper that take you 8 months to create. Can you talk to us a little bit about your creativity and just your process? You use hand dyes, you do a lot of research, and just walk us through that process.
The process is very complex, I think. And even I have taken it for granted at some points. Because a lot of it, before the artwork ever begins, there's a lot of trauma that I have to navigate within myself and within my own history, family history, genetic history, all of those things. And so I'm navigating all of that. And as an artist, I'm not only creating the work to point to something that I hope my viewers will pay attention to or listen to or feel, but in many, many ways, it's my own therapy. And so I'm navigating all of those things, and I often wonder, how would I most want to feel and be heard in what I have to say? Because my practice isn't about having a conversation with myself, by myself. It's about peeling off all these layers and then presenting it so that I can open up dialogue. Because there's another part of me that's also very much scientific. I'm a scientist. I went to pre-med. I was 3 months away from going to medical school before I went professional in the art world. And so a lot of that also is just like, how can I be effective in getting the response that I want? All to say that then the next answer or question is, how can I disarm my viewers? And very early on, it became clear to me that to disarm within a space and world where we are so desensitized to Black trauma and pain, I would need to use beauty as a vehicle to carry hard truths of that trauma. And so I decided that I was not going to participate in the showing of blood, gore, dead bodies of my people in a way that I know is not even going to impact us, because we're so unfortunately used to that as a society. And so beauty became the way to do that. And so that was the birth of rewriting history. And using the very narrative, and I get this question all the time, why did you choose the European lens to tell the story? Because we can't talk about Black freedom, and we can't talk about Haiti, and we can't talk about slavery, and we can't talk about any of those things until we address that, until we talk about that. It's not that I'm trying to promote or prop up this thing. It's that I'm attempting to vandalize it in a way that many people don't even realize I'm doing, right? And so that's really the process of the work. That's rewriting history. But that's not necessarily or is it the place where I am with my work today, you know? Because I understand that to have a conversation with people, there's some work of disarming that needs to happen, but now the work is you do your part. I don't need to disarm you anymore. That's not the world that we live in anymore. And so now to really fully understand the work that I'm doing, you have to come from a place, or you have to enter from a point of understanding, of wanting to do the spiritual mental work to receive that.
Good, thank you. Dr. Bruce, I'm going to be a little controversial and say, why would a Gardner Museum, and we have representatives here, thank you for coming, but why would the Met, these definitely prominent white institutions, and even your home place, the Getty, be interested in acquiring pieces that are definitely challenging white supremacy on all levels, religion, domestic life, politics? What is it? What's the end game for that? Why are they willing to write a check to Fabiola and say, we will buy your entire collection? What's going on?
Well, you know, it's a very, very simple question, of course. No. I mean, so that there are a couple of things, right? So you have, just in terms of the market, you have an increased black, an increased sort of group of black people who are buying visual art, right? And on all spectrums, as you know, right, Phillips, as you know. And as collectors, museums need some of these pieces for their shows and what have you. And so, you know, the power of the black dollar spent as an investment in African or in black art has actually really made a dent in terms of how museums understand viewership, how museums understand the kinds of art they should be investing in, how museums understand the kinds of things they can get as donations to increase their collections, and so there's a power there. There's also a sort of coming to terms with their own political and racial segregation in terms of these spaces. Because for them to exist in the new century, they have to anticipate, or they have to really pay attention to the ways in which the canon of American art has excluded the voices of black visual artists, because there are new viewerships, right? There are more black curators, there are more black people filling the infrastructure of these particular institutions, you know, every major institution, and they are bringing with them a public. And so the biggest exhibition at the Met, the Harlem Renaissance, you know, the Getty, Getty Research Institute, in terms of the Ebony Jet Archive, right, partnering with the National Museum of African American History and Culture, so it's a matter of survival. Because you have to be able to speak the language of one of your most important publics, right? And so in terms of black people buying black art, that's on one side, right? And they want to have them as sponsors for exhibitions and things like that, right? And then there's also that these places can't live with those histories as they are. And so why am I the first black curator at the Getty in, 2019? It speaks for itself.
Yeah, how long is the institution itself?
Well, it helps that, blue city and the blue state, I'm not gonna lie. All right, blue city in the blue state, but still there are always hurdles. There are always things. I'm bringing up lawyers again, right? The first black person at a white shoe law firm. What does he, she, or they have to sort of deal with to sort of rise the ladder and actually, get other, see, one of my most important missions, and Kara would agree with this as well, because it's for her as well, how do I actually have the next director of the Metropolitan Museum as my intern? That's the way I see it. My interns will be my bosses one day, right? And so right now, we're partnering with Spelman. We're partnering with Morehouse. We have a conservation institute for undergraduates, funding them to go to Chicago and work on the Ebony Jet Archive as maybe future conservators. And so, it's our idea to use this institution to really seed the future of the discipline, right? And so, yeah, because I kid you not, there was this one young lady, right? I forget she was going. She could have been going to Columbia College or what have you, she learned to make her own makeup from watching YouTube videos. And then she began experimenting with material. Then she became a biology major and an engineering major. And then she was in the Conservation Institute we had in Chicago last year. And she was like a junior, right? So this is the kind of brilliance that exists, and to get them in positions by which they can express their brilliance and then become leaders in the field is my mission. And hopefully the Met or whatever other institution will also invest in the kinds of talent. You know, I'm a Giants fan, and we have very poor histories of drafting.
Yes.
Which leads to, and so the whole field needs better histories of drafting, if I could put it that way. Right.
Can I add something to
Yeah.
that question? Because I want to piggyback off of everything that you said, and the conversation that I was having with Kara, also very, very vital to to what we're talking about. And there's a major difference between initiative and core. And so it's one thing to have, for these institutions to have these initiatives that really say nothing. They're very fleeting also. But it's another thing to have core values as an institution as to what, when, how, why things are going to happen. And, you know, like they are a major part of the DNA of an institution. The reason why that's important to the question that you posed is that
Like New York. You're from New York.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, let's let it pass. Institutions realize, I think, that we know. And we cannot go further than where we are right now without speaking to, answering to those things, without implementing things that are of core value to our institutions, you know, and it's a necessity. Maybe it's a part of survival, right? Maybe it's a part of being relative to whatever's happening in society and culture. But I think, and I suspect that there's a deeper thing that's happening, which is like, yeah, there's a part where that history, we are already aware as a society that it doesn't serve you. It hasn't served you to maintain these narratives. Now you're at a point where it can't.
Okay.
And we can't move forward without you. And so we can't do anything but include you in that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I want to take your attention to the piece up there, and that's one of the pieces that Huffington Post brought to light, and I know I'm getting down to specifically your work and not our beautiful theory that we're talking about, but I do want to point out that the dress that she is wearing is made out of paper, 100% paper, which is phenomenal. And I think the drapes behind it are made out of paper. Can you talk about why that period with Black female bodies? What was your messaging behind that? But also, like, talk about the colors that you're using, because you were very specific on it being historically accurate to what we were doing. And the Black female body in the Americas, when they were transported during the transatlantic slave trade. So,
There were a few
what is that piece
things-
called, by the way?
That's Marie Antoinette is dead.
Yes.
And so not all the pieces in rewriting history were actually like recreations of a dress or a scene, to be clear. Most of them were made up for me. But this particular piece happens to be a recreation of Pompadour's dress, not Marie Antoinette. So I like to trick my viewers in that way, where I'm switching their reality. I'm adding a name to a painting that don't match, right? So this is not de Pompadour. I titled it Marie Antoinette's Dead. Why did I do that? Because Marie Antoinette is very significant in our understanding of what we consider to be greed and opulence, and, you know, the saying that, you know, let them eat cake. I didn't know her. I wasn't there. I don't know if that's the reality of what happened, but it's what it signified for me in that opulence, which forced me to question what freedom truly is and or looks like. We tend to attach these very large moments, these huge moments as acts of freedom or claiming of freedom, like revolts and the opposition to slavery and like these massive things. But how about freedom is the privilege of sitting for a dress, with wearing a dress and being painted by a painter, right? And so it's the simplicity of freedom that I was interested in unraveling. And so I used Marie Antoinette as that. But then I also decided that the original painting of Pompadour is that there's a writing desk next to her, and I switched that out for a mini altar. So that's already me knowing that I had full intention later on in my work to include African focused spirituality and Haiti in that conversation. Again, like I said, because we can't look at European history without dealing with and talking about the Caribbean and specifically Haiti. And so that's kind of my introduction into that conversation. And then she's also wearing the dress, or holding the doll, which is also a paper doll. I'm doing a lot there. I'm also questioning if not going after what we understand voodoo is. Because in one instance, we think about what we see in New Orleans, which I love and is another home to me, but we think of hoodoo, we think of all these other different spin-offs from voodoo, and then we think that voodoo is also having a doll and pushing pins into it and doing these things that are very evil and unkind, and that's very opposite what voodoo actually is. So in a very gentle way, I'm challenging that. I'm attempting to say that that's actually not what voodoo is at all. And so many people don't realize that on the side altar, that's those sticks with the red twine around it, string, is actually what voodoo dolls used to look like. There was no human head or attributes of the human person you were going to stick pins into. It very much does not resemble humanity in any way. So, there's just so many layers in this piece for me.
Thank you. I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit, and Dr. Brooks, if you could, looking at the Black female body throughout art history, Western art canon, we're present all the time, despite what they want to say, right? Push this to where we are now, our presidential candidate. I'd love for you to talk about, does art history play a part in that? There's the art lovers and the art connoisseurs and the artists and the collectors, but for the general public, is that a conversation with how an artist, whether Black or white, depicts Black women, communicate to the general population of who can lead and be the voice of this nation that has literally used the Black female womb to recreate the most important economic vehicle, the Black hand, Black labor. Is there something going on? Is there a conversation going on?
Oh, there is. This could be considered court painting. It could be considered aristocratic painting, but it's also a form of popular culture, right? Because at the salons, I would say in France, especially 18th, 19th century, people would, buy a ticket to go in and see, the latest fashions or their favorite Bouguereau or their favorite painter, who would make, images sort of like this of, fashion, right? But for us, I think photography is one of the main ways in which people come into contact, globally, or have globally for the Black image, because, when I travel, I find that the stereotype of I find that images of Black American men meet me before I get there. And if those images are stereotypes, if I'm in, Ghana or Johannesburg, as soon as I say I'm Black American, they go to something, something they saw on a video or something like that as a form of translation, as a form to sort of connect. Not always to be disrespectful, but to connect. And so images, especially of Black women, are in the world even before you get there. right? And so how does one unravel those stereotypes, which are often negative and, made from a certain kind of, patriarchal perspective? It's images like this. It's images, of, I would say, artists like yourself, artists like Carrie Mae Weems, artists who are actually coming from a standpoint in which they center the experiences of black women. And that's the most important part, centering the experiences of black women so that actually communicates a certain kind of authority, a certain communication of how I see myself, a certain communication, you speaking, to this subject, you're creating the subject, but there's also this communication as you build it, right? About how she should pose and, how high is her chin up and all of these things. And so there's this back and forth thing. And so, yes, Kamala's meeting a whole history of racist stereotypes that are being said out loud, and that's the wild part. Are being said out loud now that she has to deal with it. I'm sure, every black woman in here has to deal with it their whole lives, but, she's running for president, and still running for president, they're saying the thing out loud, the racist things out loud, which are often reinforced by histories of degrading images.
Right, and so when we look at a piece like this, and this leisure, right, like black women in leisure, I think like what you touched on is that, does she allow, does the visual arts, especially in the art canon, allow for us to pull from that, to define or reshape how we're talking about the political landscape, and even black women in leisure spaces, and still commanding that importance and that synergy of how we get out, we need to vote, we need to do these things. And especially I think of cities like Chicago, where I'm representing, I'm very privileged to have that, where it's a city founded by a black Haitian man, right? And has been a major force throughout that. And so looking at all of the great visual artists and literary giants that have come out of there, what that does. And so back to you, does that inform you as you're writing the scholarship, and does that inform you as you're creating? So we'll start with you.
Okay, so she's wearing a whole paper dress,
Yeah.
sitting within a paper space. All to say also that for many, many years, and to some degree even still now, we only existed on paper. I can't even wrap my mind around that. The proof of life and existence is only through paper. The Bible is written on paper. The Quran on paper. The Constitution on paper. These are not stone.
Slave ownership on paper.
Currency to own black bodies, to own them and to kill them. All done on a material that is fleeting, that falls apart, that means absolutely nothing other than the meaning we give to it. There's no material that has that kind of power in our world. And so for a black woman to be sitting in that small little frame wearing paper, she's saying, I am here, I exist. We're not talking about archives. We're not talking about family names that are lost or we've gained that we don't know who the heck these people are, but they're our last names. We're talking about IET as a place where, as an immigrant here living in America, I can't go into African American archives to find my family tree. I have to go to the Caribbean. I have to go back to IET where nothing is there for me to find my family line, unless stories were told. So it's to say, why even are we even valuing these things? Why isn't spoken word important in talking about what existed, what exists still? Why isn't my very breath and my life sitting in this chair, in this paper space, not valued more than this material?
Thank you. Brooks?
There's a point where I was doing some genealogy on my own family that when the census records died out, I had to go to property records, right? And in property records, the name of the ancestor I was looking for Couldn't find the name, but I found the number, right? And on paper, all on this paper that I'm touching and I'm turning, and I'm just seeing my family tree just dwindle and dwindle down to an 11-year-old young lady who I only saw in a number. But I knew her name was actually misspelled a couple of times in a couple of census records before, right? And so the idea of using that material and taking paper as something that to reclaim is a very powerful gesture. And I'm just thinking about like working with your hands that way, right? Can you describe working with your hands that way? Like just in terms of just, because I come from quilt makers and seamstresses, but to tear paper and to make it into.
The process, many of these dresses had blood on them because I would often get paper cuts, specifically when dealing with the paper dresses, like these white sheets of paper that I would have to paint or color and then, give form to. And so there's a lot of paper cuts, there's a lot of blood, literally blood, sweat, and tears infused into this, and I really did handle them as if I was dealing with names of people on paper that have been lost or forgotten throughout time. My practice today is different in that where I was taking flat sheets of paper and really breathing form as we understand it into these human shapes. Now I am using spirituality to transform paper. So now I'm breaking down paper. I'm collecting newspapers from all of my neighbors, and I'm like in the hood just getting paper to break it down to create paper pulp, and then rebuilding that into 3D form. So it's no longer about just human form that we understand, but now how can we get past that? How can I use my work and the practice of working with paper and these really ridiculous meanings that we assign to that material to point to something that's more spiritually tangible, if you will. It's an oxymoron to say that, I understand that, but that's the only way to say that. How can I use my work to point to humanity's flaws, injustice, and also saying, as a Haitian, we can't rely on the Haitian Revolution anymore to lay claim to Black freedom, because that hasn't saved our country. It's not going to save our country. Now we have to get past that point, and we have to reconnect to the practice of voodoo and the continent that allowed us that freedom. It's about talking about you're free to practice whatever religion you want, but let's not forget about voodoo. Let's not demonize voodoo. Let's remember that Black freedom is centered on that, or that voodoo is centered within Black freedom. And so that's how I'm using paper, this very temporal material, to talk about that.
Thank you. Finally, what's next for you? I mean, I don't know what it is. I mean, you have a show coming to Chicago, which hasn't been announced yet, and Jonathan Green, which I'm very excited about. That's a huge deal.
Boston.
Yes, Boston. You have Boston. What's going on at the Getty? I know we're going to do some stuff here in Chicago, but what's next? And we have an election, and how are we going to make sure visual arts is centered to that? Either one. Let's go.
So Boston is my next exhibition in February. It's a massive takeover solo exhibition, and I'm using it as an opportunity and platform to do all the things I just talked about, and to really propel my work in IET, and again, to be a part. I'm interested in building bridges with my exhibitions that are coming up. I'm interested in putting those little planks of wood. If I can put one plank onto that bridge, where we can look at Black freedom from an aspect that incorporates all of the Black mosaic. That's the conversation I want to be a part of. And so Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum is really the beginning of this new work for me, and then Chicago, and then
Yes, right now a couple of things. And so I'm working on an exhibition on Paul Revere Williams, the African-American architect. He redesigned the Beverly Hills Hotel. Every time you see the Beverly Hills Hotel, as that's black man's handwriting. He, one of America's greatest architects, but a lot of people still don't know who he was. And so at the Getty, working on an exhibition for him from his archive. And I'm working on an exhibition, Black Chicagoans. And it really is going to deal with a very special moment in the history of Chicago, Inglewood and the South Side, Bronzeville. When you had, around the South Side Community Center, when you had people like Gwendolyn Brooks, right? You had all of these artists there, Charles White, you even had Gordon Parks there for a little while, who were Richard Hunt as a young man. All these artists, literary artists and visual artists working in this center, and it was really a Chicago Renaissance. They call it the Chicago Black Renaissance, but it's really not talked about enough. Just in terms of, the Harlem Renaissance, we know these other kinds of, outgrowths of creative activity, but it's really a tribute to Chicago, right, for me. It's really a tribute to the kind of engine. Sam Cooke was there, Lorraine Hansberry was there, and of course, Emmett Till, around the same time in the 50s, and so it was a very special moment, and I think it needs to be explored and really praised and researched. Yeah.
And the election, real quick, as I didn't answer
Yeah,
that.
we have the DNC.
That's coming
Yeah.
up. We have to continue to vandalize. We have to continue to vandalize. It's hard, and it is stressful, and it's not a burden that any one group should have. But specifically for me as an artist, that's what I came to do.
All right.
And so the work will continue to vandalize old narratives that do not serve us, never have.
All right. Well, thank you very much. If there's any questions, feel free to ask.
With your work at the Getty, you're building this collection. What are you thinking about for that one? Similarly, in Chicago, you got a big city, huge city. What are you trying to do with art, either city-owned art or private exhibits? And then you did speak about what you're doing in February, but maybe a little bit more later. So just 1, 2, 3, maybe. And then we'll finish up.
You want to go?
Yeah.
Yeah, go.
So my work, you can earn, when I graduated from a doctoral program, you can go through a doctoral program and not have to study any African-American artists. But then claim, and then claim that you are a expert in the field. And so, research sits at the heart of how we know artists, especially African-American artists. And so my work with, acquisitions in terms of the archives, I worked with Richard Hunt before he passed last year. With his archive. And so having these archives at the greatest art history library in the world, right? Researchers can no longer say that you don't have the voices of prominent African Americans as you're doing this research for your dissertation, for a book, and that kind of thing. So it's really changing the canon of American art. Yeah.
For us in Chicago, which I'm very fortunate to represent, we have created a visual arts department. We pulled out of programming to make sure we focus on visual artists. And going back to what you said, I had the honor of working with Dr. Christopher Reed, who pretty much wrote the book on the Black Chicago Renaissance and unearths a lot of these people that have been just kind of pushed to the side. So one thing we are doing, and we're rolling out during the DNC, which I'm very excited about, is making sure we are highlighting Black artists that were either from or loosely connected to Chicago and giving them the platform that they deserve. That includes publications. I think a city should not have an artist should not have to leave the city in order to get support. And so I think it's all of our obligation to make sure that creative spaces are supported by cities. And also literature, right? Like that has to be part of the conversation. And so it can't just be these contemporary modern artists, but it has to be artists that didn't get their flowers while they were, you know, you talk about Richard Hunt, right? Like most people don't know there were 3 black people that graduated from the School of the Art Institute at that time, but we only focused on Richard Hunt, and we can say it's due because he's a male and the other 2 were females. But like, Shirley Woodson is in Detroit, fully functioning and celebrated, and so we need to make sure as a city, so one thing that I am rolling out my strategic plan is making sure we are bringing them to the forefront and supporting them and bringing people like Fabiola, who is, you know, and I hear what you're saying about not relying on the revolution, but I am going to rely on the revolution for the city of Chicago, and we are going to do a big thing and have her and other artists come out and recognize Chicago for the amazing space that it is. So, yeah.
Finally, Fabiola, in February, when we come to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, how many pieces are you developing for that? 30. 30. You better get to work now.
I know.
Tell us what we're likely to see, and then we'll close out. Thank you.
You will see a portal that challenges you to leave your humanity at the door and then to enter into a sacred space that questions you on what you would like to leave behind and what your legacy you would like to have on this earth when you're gone. I'm not interested in my art being received or looked at from a place that is lacking and limited. This is a challenge, and I'm challenging all of my viewers to come to that altar space, to that sacred space, and join me in being the best that we can be as humans.
Well, here on the Vineyard and in Boston and at Howard University, we always salute Lois Mailou Jones. So we're channeling her when we come see you in February. Give our panel a nice hand. Thanks for. Oh, you had a question, Sandra? Sandra had a question.
Thank you, Richard. First of all, I want to thank the 3 of you for a lovely, insightful conversation. And Fabiola, you represent our future, so we certainly appreciate that. I would like to have you entertain the idea that, yes, we've had the Harlem Renaissance show at the Met. We had a Harlem Renaissance show in 1987 at the Studio Museum. And the other day, I saw the Harlem Renaissance show at the Met about 5 times. But as I was walking out one day, there was a young woman around your age, Fabiola, who said, you know, I think we need another Renaissance. So that stuck with me. And since I'm looking at the future, the curator of the future and the artist of the future, if you were trying to put together the next iteration of the Chicago Renaissance or the Harlem Renaissance, how would you envision that for, let's say, 2050?
Oh, okay. Do you want to answer that first? Or I think at that point I would put on my time traveler hat and say that in order to create a Harlem Renaissance that I imagine, I would first need to go back in time and talk about not Afrofuturism, but Afro-surrealism. Because that question really reminds me of what Breton was searching for when he was working on and creating surrealism in general. And we really only think about surrealism from a French-European standpoint. But Afrofuturism is, to me, the same thing as Afro-surrealism, in that we don't rely on mental acrobatics and all of those things to create the magic in our work and creativity that we do. It is a part of our everyday lives, like the Caribbean, like in Mexico, Frida Kahlo, Martinique, and all the other artists that were very much a part of Afro-Surrealism. And so in order to create very substantial exhibition like the one you're talking about, I think we need to go back there first and maybe ditch the Afrofuturism title and acknowledge what the Caribbean and all these other parts of the world were doing to talk about spirituality and mysticism.
Thank you.
I think any kind of Renaissance won't necessarily be US based. It will include voices from many different spaces, black spaces. And, the Renaissance, people think the Harlem Renaissance was huge, but, there were a couple of friends who knew each other. They were supported by, some people who gave them money to make their art. And then, we look back and say, oh, Langston Hughes was doing work. And so it's kind of looking back as well. And so if we can look back on the last 20 years, because, Langston Hughes wrote, what's that, More Stately Mansions, the essay. If people like what we do, fine. If they don't, fine. Basically, he says in the essay, because he was rebelling against the generation before him. And so we would have to look back, look at this moment, and then also look back, what have artists been saying that's actually taking in the lessons of the past, but really being fully in the now. What are we rebelling, what are they rebelling against? What are they saying about themselves? What are they saying about the world, And what kind of cultures are they pulling? Like Langston Hughes, the blues, the weary blues, right? And then he brought in, he collaborated with Aaron Douglas visually. He was bringing in ancient Egypt and sub-Saharan Africa in a lot of his work, right? And they came together. And so what is an artist in 2020, 2023, what are they doing? And are there similarities and crossroads and this kind of thing? And so, but I guess my answer would be, it won't be solely US-based.
We have with us Crystal Williams, who's the president of Rhode Island School of Design. So I had to give you your propers before you ask your question.
I'm sorry about that. So Fabiola, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yours is work that I've followed for more than a decade now, I think, and the mastery over material and multiple kinds of disciplines is relatively unusual in my experience for contemporary artists. I'm interested, all three of you, because of the different perspectives you have in the field, what excites you now about current folks that are working? This is sort of building on this question that she asked. I'm just interested, what are you super geeked about?
I'm super geeked about the fact that we're having these conversations and that we don't have to, I think it's interesting that she talks about rewriting history, but it's really telling the truth. And then realizing that we are in the spaces to tell the truth and no one can stop us. And realizing that there's a power of being a commissioner of culture, an artist, and a curator. And knowing that we can be just as culturally relevant and influence and have conversations with making policies and procedures that are going to affect everyone. That's what I'm super geeked about. I'm super geeked also about the fact that we can say, challenge things visually, like Pushkin, how he went from looking like a regular black man to now looking like a thin-lipped, stringy-haired white man. Those kind of things that we're in those spaces. We are doing this leisure stuff. So that's what I'm geeked about. So, yeah.
I would say that, I'm geeked about a lot of things. Honestly, one of the things is that that even the opportunity to, the receiving of my work is a major thing for me, right? Because I'm very aware of the art market and all of these like very surface things that we can't escape as makers and that are very part of the journey of making in our careers. But to really be able to work in the way that I have and have people receive my work as I intend to share it, has been and is something I geek out about all the time, and that my children get to see that. I'm geeked out about, and this is all probably sounding very egotistical, but there's a part of me where that's the window that I'm looking at it through a lot of times, right? And that my children can say I'm the first Haitian black woman to be at the Met. Why is that? Shouldn't be. And what can we do as institutions to change that? I'm geeked out about that and these conversations that we're able to have that I think are very much a part of what I'm dealing with as an artist, as being a black Haitian woman in the Met. Like, how do we change that so that it's a core value in these institutions? So I have faith and I have hope.
So when you have the associate director of the Getty here, you have to have her close us out.
Wait, but also let's recognize that she is the first black woman to be over the Olmsted Research Center, one of the oldest archives, repositories of black culture in the United States.
Even more why she should close us out.
And at the Schomburg, and at the Studio Museum, and we can go on and on and on, but thank you.
One, thank you. And thank you to the Ogletree Public Forum Series. It's really important to have these conversations and have them in historical spaces where we have always gathered to think through strategies towards freedom, strategy towards realizing our futures and our artistic endeavors and all our dreams and hopes. But one of the things I really want to close with, and I was thinking about the wonderful questions you all asked, is that, Octavia Butler said, there isn't anything new under the sun. I do believe she meant the Western sun. But she said there are other suns. And I encourage everyone today to discover those other suns. And what we have here with Clinée, Fabiola, and LeRonn are, our hopes and dreams of finding those other suns. And so they are representing, I think, the future of the arts, the future of what's possible, and that they are not only doing that by themselves, but everyone collectively in this room, everyone who talks to them is a part of that journey. And so I just say, may we continue that journey, and ashe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists.
Can I have one thing?
Absolutely.
So, I really do think that, just hearing what everyone said, I'm excited about the possibilities of everyone supporting each other. That everyone in this room is not innocent, right? You're here because you're supporting a fabulous artist, or supporting a conversation, but everyone in this room support each other. And I think that's how hope begins.
Around for a few minutes, and thank you all for coming again. Thank you.